That's got my two.
Do you want another?
I'll take an iced tea, actually.
Oh, I'll do an iced tea too. Thanks.
I had a project that we were working on, and we have like a single family house with a dadu in the backyard. Well, originally we had a big driveway connecting the house in the front to the dadu in the back. Well, the city was giving us grief because they said you can only do a 20-foot wide driveway by our code, and then you can widen it out once you go past the main house. So we did come up with a solution, but my customer asked me, he goes, well, Mike, can people still park 2 cars in the driveway and still be able to maneuver around to go around the house to the dadu in the back to park back there? I said, well, yes, in theory, code-wise you can fit, but most people cannot maneuver their vehicle that way. Most people have a really hard time backing a vehicle 50 feet back and around something. So code-wise, it meets code. However, if you think about ergonomics and how people drive, more than likely, somebody's gonna get their car tapped every time someone's trying to drive around it. Or it only works, let's say, if the person up front parks their car like a foot away from the garage door. That's why a lot of these parking issues we're gonna see with HB 110 are gonna be a problem, because parking is so limited that, and parking is, like you mentioned, is so tight, is that it really takes people to be very good at maneuvering their vehicle, very good at parking their vehicle, very good at backing out their vehicle so they don't hit somebody next to them. And also, I mean, literally just understanding that other people live there too. You may want to wash your car in the middle of the driveway, but you're blocking the people behind you from being able to access their driveway. So.
Oh, because it's the unit behind you.
It's the unit behind you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying now.
So, well, putting a lot of faith in people's ability to maneuver, an SUV or even a small car back there.
I appreciate you guys being here. I'm excited to talk about housing affordability today. Before we get into it, do you guys mind just telling us about how you guys met?
Him and I met back at University of Washington before we got in architecture school, and it seemed to be that him and I were the only, normals. So
yeah, but you were definitely into architecture. You wanted to be in architecture, and you had also been working for an architecture firm at that point, right?
Yeah, this is why I was kind of jaded.
This was number 6 of like 6 things I wanted to do.
Yeah,
it was like I fell into it sort of bass backwards. So it was sort of my last straw to figure out how I was actually going to graduate with something, and then quickly learned that I was going to make any money as an architect, so I went into construction instead.
That's what a lot of people did. I mean, University of Washington had a dual degree program. You got an architecture degree and you got a construction management degree. And I think everybody who got the dual degree like you, I don't think any of them went into architecture.
No. Not a single one.
No. And, out of the UW Architecture School, it's pretty rare for me to meet somebody who is an architect who graduated from that program. Like, I rarely run in contact with people like that. I run into a lot of people who went to WSU. My vice president at the company, Karen, she's WSU grad. One of the guys, actually 2 of the guys I hired in my company, WSU grads.
Yeah. It was very theory-based.
Theory-based.
It was very not high in the practicality.
No. And the one thing, I've learned in this line of work, practicality is essential to your company's success and your success as an architect, because almost every customer comes to you, bottom line, like, we need this to work, we need this to be efficient, we need to make money off of this. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that, in order for you to be successful in this business, you have to create something that people want, something that people can sell, so then they can go and do it again.
Right.
Which, I think also
Weird.
Plays into a lot of what we'll be talking about later.
Can't believe that would be
with housing affordability, is that, thing I know we'll be discussing is that when your pool of buyers starts shrinking, you still need to be creating a product to be consumed. What happens if your pool of buyers gets smaller and smaller and smaller? How do you refine what we do to make it still be desirable,
right,
and obtainable?
You know what's funny is that it took me 3 years of knowing him before I knew that he went to architecture school. I had no idea. No idea. And I think you told me.
Well,
he didn't. And then I had to call him out on it. I didn't know you were an architect. And he was like, no. I went to school.
It wasn't a source of shame.
Mike's the
Right.
architect.
Well, I'm also the odd architect too, where like I wear jeans to work. I wear like Def Leppard t-shirts and Pink Floyd t-shirts. Like
Yeah,
I'm
you're not the quintessential
Little
turtleneck wearing.
glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I grew up in this field working for home builders, so I never really got that cushioned start in
Well,
the industry.
I think both of us too. I mean, we kind of benefited from the fact that we kind of came up in a time that was still sort of analog. You know?
Exactly.
I mean, we
Yeah.
got to watch things transform into digital, but you were basically brought up with all the old school stuff, and
Yeah.
and all the yellers and all that stuff as well. So there weren't HR departments. There weren't.
Nope.
It was a lot of sink or swim, I guess the best way to put it. Back
Exactly.
then.
That's for me, a lot of it really was sink or swim.
Yeah.
Of you especially from what I do on architecture, where I primarily design houses. Generally, when you're designing houses, there's not a big team with you. It's generally just yourself and maybe a project manager, maybe a drafter, but most of the time it's just you. So if there's a problem that comes out, like if you have a city requesting revisions, you have a customer upset, you have an issue in the field, it's usually up to you.
Well, you wear a lot of hats in general because, I mean, every time I meet you for whatever, dinner or lunch, you're there usually before me because I'm stuck in traffic, but you're sketching on a napkin. You're literally sketching on a napkin. And I don't know, I don't think I ever really got into that, doing that, sitting around doing, I mean, I would maybe a little bit, but you're doing, I'll walk up, you've got a full house design on your napkin. What do you think about this? I'm like, how long have you been here? I don't know, about 5 minutes. I was like, you've got a full design of a elevation of your house, which I think is, I mean, that's pretty cool.
Well, you're perfect.
He's got stick figures.
I can't draw people. So that's a funny thing. People think of me as an architect. I'm some sort of artist. I can draw houses. I can design houses. Have me draw a person or draw a car. It's going to look like a 3-year-old did it. Like I cannot do that at all. Like I can't paint.
Yeah, but
I
the
can't
thing
do any of
that the thing that you know better than I think any architect I've ever met, especially on a single family home, is just the economics behind it as well. I mean, whenever I watch a podcast with somebody that's supposed to be an expert on something, especially related to single family home, and I always like run it past Mike later, like, is that real or is not? And usually get the straight skinny after the fact. But I mean, I think that's the clear differentiator for you, is that you know what works both from a buildable perspective, but also what's going to work financially for people. And in a market like this, that's really, really hard because the margins are so tiny compared to other parts of the market or the other parts of the country. So,
Well, let's jump into that.
Yeah,
I mean,
let's
you're
do
talking
that.
about market. Let's get into the market now. Like, how has the market shifted post-COVID, post-ZIRP, RTO, return to office, all that? How's the market shifted? What are we seeing now that we weren't seeing 5 years ago?
I would say monumental, because during COVID we had a lot of exodus of people leaving urban areas, leaving because they're working remote. We saw house prices explode in the town I know very well, Chelan and Cle Elum, Boise, Idaho. We had a lot of people being able to move away from their job because they were working 5 days a week. Now they'll work whenever they want. Well, now that with the return to office, a lot of those people are having to come back. So we've seen, honestly, I've seen the collapse of some markets because, there's the return to work edict. You have to be in the office 5 days a week if you work for Amazon. Well, everybody who bought a house in Boise or bought a house in Spokane because it was affordable now has to come back.
Is that actually actively happening now?
It is.
Are you seeing it shift?
Because I've actually been eavesdropping people, like when I'm in Chelan, and I've heard conversations of people being upset because they had to sell their house in Boise or sell their house in Chelan, and to go buy a house somewhere in the Seattle region so they can be close to Amazon or close to Microsoft. Because even hybrid, great, you can work remotely 3 days a week.
Yeah.
However, you can't live in Spokane and then drive to Redmond for 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And then drive back.
Well, I mean, think about it too. I mean, you have to almost consider them chronologically. I mean, you've got COVID, and then we still had zero interest rate policy during that, and then that went away effectively 3 years ago at this point, rocketed up to 5%, which, the difference, and we've had that in the past where, the Fed has raised rates by 500 or so basis points, but it's a huge difference between raising them from 2 or 3% up to 7% versus 0 and 5%.
Yeah.
If you know bond math, that's a considerable jump. And then you had, return to office.
Yeah.
So it was like, you had COVID where all of a sudden we all thought the world was going to come to an end, including the Treasury and the Fed that dropped $7 to $12 trillion in the system from the monetary perspective. Then you had, and that just inflated real estate across the board, whether it was single family home or commercial real estate, everything, those dollars were easily attracted towards real estate almost overnight. And then when interest rates went up, it shut the lights off on new development, at least on the commercial real estate side. It hampered it on the single family. But at the same time, most of the big home builders like you work for, they were playing the game of, well, I can finance your home for you, unlike the banks. So it threw off existing home sales, but it meant that new home sales actually went up for the most part. And then you've got, return to office now. And it's like, okay, you threw another huge curveball at the housing market. And I'm interested to see, especially places like Boise. It's like, what's going to happen to that place,
Well, it is because there's not a lot of existing jobs out there. I mean, a lot. Boise does have a very strong economy, is a very desirable place to live. But if you're a software worker who came from San Jose, there's not a lot of opportunity for you. If all of a sudden you're getting called back to the office, you're not going to quit your job and find a comparable paying job in Boise. Spokane is interesting because our firm was doing a lot of work in the Spokane region, where you could buy a brand new house for $500,000 on a big lot, and a lot of big national home builders went there pretty hard. Lennar went there pretty hard. D.R. Horton hit that area pretty hard, and now they're having a lot of issues because there's not the same amount of people moving from the west side over there. The only thing that's really helping the Spokane market is the sheer size of the town, is that homes around $400,000 to $500,000 can still be purchased there, and that is within the buying ability for a lot of people who are local. There's some big Amazon facilities there. There's some manufacturing facilities there. So somebody who maybe makes 65 to 75 a year can still purchase a good home there.
It sounds like you're jumping into demographics a little bit now.
Sorry.
That's where I want to go.
Yeah.
How do the demographics play into that? How do we throw that in, and how does that starting to impact the way things are headed?
Demographics, is something I know we're going to be talking about with aging, about how this next generation of home buyers, the buying potential is shrinking as well as their ranks are shrinking. Is that some markets are primed for you could say basically retiring buyers. Back when I was a kid, whenever somebody's parents or grandparents were aging, they moved to Phoenix, they moved to Florida,
Right.
They moved to areas where there was not a lot of jobs, but there was sunny weather, there was golf courses.
Didn't matter because they're on fixed income anyway.
Exactly.
Yep.
But now, there's certain markets that are spectacular, like Boise's a spectacular place to live if you're retired, if you are well off financially. There's some beautiful homes there, some great golf courses there, not a lot of high paying tech jobs there. So, and there's some even like Chelan. I do a lot of work in the Chelan Valley, and there's a lot of people moving to Chelan that I've been working with, but they aren't of working age people. They are people in their 60s, early 70s who are retiring, or we're designing homes for people in their mid 50s who are planning their retirement 5 to 10 years from now. But demographically, there's not a lot of people, like for instance, my family, who are still actively working, moving to an area like that.
Yeah.
Talk about. Go ahead. No.
Well, I was just saying. A single family home in particular, but even on the multifamily side, it's interesting. You can show this or whatever you want, but just looking at the numbers, you're looking at with the millennials in particular, it was really the prime mover behind the multifamily explosion in the last 15 years. You had, millennials coming out of college primarily right after the GFC. And that's essentially when the multifamily boom occurred, was that they're coming out, predominantly can't find work, or if they can, it's low paying. They want to get out of their parents' house most of the time. But they drove just a tsunami of apartment construction, and they really haven't, in many cases, graduated to that single family home yet. And, you look at what's happening now with Gen Z in terms of, the numbers there, it's even less than the millennials. It's more like Gen X, if not even lower.
Yeah.
And then Gen Alpha, or whatever they're calling, it's even lower than that. So it's like, if you're projecting out, the numbers are pretty dire in terms of, where's the demand going to come from? If it's just about headcount, it's going to be probably a question for a lot of regions of sort of, are you a winner or a loser? Are you in a place that's desirable to live? Do you have the job growth that in many cases isn't necessarily a fait accompli like it has been the last 30, 40 years, because you're going to be people are going to probably be more selective, from that perspective. So
Exactly.
I wonder what happens to the Northeast, the upper Midwest. I mean, is that going to be where things take off? Probably not, because not only are they aging there, but it kind of becomes a death spiral where it's like, have enough people, especially boomers, now passing away and leaving their building stock out there. Is it really going to contribute to supply? No, because no one wants to live there. I think you've seen it too, even just in kind of a microcosm in Seattle, where
locally, yeah.
the 70s split level is not what a millennial wants to live in. I mean, it is supply, but is it really going to add to, the available building stock? Because in many cases, I don't know if it's really even desirable anymore. It's going to, if anything, get torn down and rebuilt into something else. I mean, I think, right? I mean, but what's your perspective on that?
Well, my perspective is, it's a good thing to bring up because, when I was a kid, I remember it was, my dream to live in one of those big estate houses over east of Woodinville on a horse-acre lot.
Oh, the Street of Dreams,
the Street of Dreams style houses. And I mean, they were desired. I mean, a lot of parents, my parents' age, owned out there. But now a lot of those people are aging out. They're passing away. They're needing to pare down. But it's interesting. You look at those houses that are for sale, and that's when a lot of the millennials don't want those. I mean, it's too much maintenance. The ceilings are low.
Yeah.
It has formal living rooms, formal dining rooms, and you can't
big lots you have to maintain.
Plus, one of the biggest things in terms of redevelopment, you can't redevelop it. It's on a acre lot on a septic. You can't go buy these houses, tear them down, and build 10 units or 15 units on them.
Yeah.
You don't have the infrastructure or anything in place, and
you don't have the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a lot of housing stock that's just not going to be desired by these smaller pool of buyers you're getting. So what happens with that? I mean, is it somebody just say, I'm just going to take the write-off and just, even though it's assessed at 2.2 million, I got an offer at 1.5. It's ridiculously low. However, I bought this house for $400,000 back in 1989.
Yeah.
I'm still okay. I'll get rid of it.
Yeah.
I'll take a horse ranch. I don't mind living out there.
But what happens though is in terms of comps. I mean, that's one of the biggest things we see in real estate is the comps.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, if you have a whole neighborhood of $2 million homes, somebody on the street, comparable house, says, I'm out of here. They sell their house for $1.4 million. Now everybody down the line who tries to sell, that comp's going to show up.
Well, home prices are established by the marginal buyer.
Exactly.
So it's like, it all takes that 3% to all of a sudden ruin a market in many cases, unfortunately.
Well, it's the same with the opposite way too. I mean, you look at the opposite end, like let's say a particular neighborhood, every home's been creeping up, 900,000, $1 million. All of a sudden, you have the exact same floor plan. You're going to put it up for 1.1. You sell it for 1.1. Well, then the problem is all of a sudden the market starts to swoon. Somebody who has the same floor plan all of a sudden says, well, mine's worth 1.2. Well, why? Well, he sold this for 1.1. Mine's a little better. So it just perpetually keeps going up.
Yeah.
Even though the market may be starting to swoon.
But single family home, the market, that still dominates. I mean, that still is dominating
it's the right share of the market.
Right?
It is because you're selling to individual buyers. You have you have investors, you have, like I said, I mentioned individual buyers. I mean,
Well, it's still the aspiration, I think, of most people, right?
Exactly.
I mean, and you look at the square footages of what's built in the States. I mean, it's, the lion's share of square footage is still single family home. I mean, we talk about rental, and rental has gone up considerably over the course of the last, maybe 15, 20 years, especially with the millennial wave.
Yeah.
But, the driver for housing is still single family home.
oh, but by far.
When does that shift, or does it shift? Is it in our lifetime? I mean,
It may already have. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that millennials have not been able to afford a home is, it turns into a lifestyle effectively, right?
Right.
I mean, if you have gotten used to the fact that you don't own a car, you want to be in town, and your concept of happiness is, I love being in a place where I have great restaurants, and I'm, in the middle of all the action, and I like, walkability and everything. I mean, your concept of the American dream of a house with a white picket fence probably isn't all that important anymore. It's more that you've reconceptualized it, or maybe rationalized it. I don't know, but regardless, it seems to be. I think it's more rationalizing, but that's just me. But maybe they've turned that into the new American dream. I'm not sure, but and the other part too is economic. I mean, there's affording a house is one thing, just with the mortgage, but it's also all the other things that go along with it. It's the the maintenance, the repairs, the the stocking and supply of it, and everything else.
Yeah.
With renting, a lot of that's not your responsibility. So you obviously lose the house value appreciation. But again, back to demographics, do you really have enough people to drive that future house valuation appreciation? Because if there's more stock and less people, well, it's a simple supply and demand ratio at that point. I mean, it may be different for different locations, but in some places, I mean, again, not to pick on the upper Midwest and Northeast, but man, I mean, there might be some locations that just no one wants to live in anymore, and it'll crater the market.
what's interesting, I posted this earlier, and we talked about this, and the question I posted earlier on the poll, because I knew we're going to have this podcast, was, will millennials and Gen Z ever achieve the same home ownership rates as past generations? And I asked you both what you thought the answer were, and just to be clear, first one was yes, but it will take longer. Yes, if housing costs stabilize. No, it's becoming unattainable. No, new norm is renting. And I already told you guys, almost 60% of the answers were no, it's becoming unattainable. And so you mentioned something earlier that I thought was interesting, that it might be unattainable, or it could be a mindset, or there's a lot of factors that play inside. But to me, it sounds like that's what people feel or see.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what they feel right now too. I mean, these things can change. I mean, in 10 years, what is it? The average age of the average age of death for a boomer was last year. So they're going to be divesting whether they want to or not.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's pretty morbid, but ultimately, they also own a considerable amount of the building stock in terms of single family home.
Was it like 60% or something?
It's something absurd.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy number.
The average home buyer last year was 54. I mean, it's just, that's average, not even like new home buyer, just average buyer. So it's obviously weighted towards boomers and Gen X right now for single family home. But, when you die, you can't have a home anymore, obviously. So, unlocking that supply might change the dynamics here over the course of the next 10 or 15 years pretty markedly. I just don't know if it's going to happen universally, and I don't know if it's going to happen, or if it's going to be overrepresented in some locations like here where you have constricted supply versus someplace like, Texas, where you can just build out to the moon, because that's just all they do. I mean, they encourage growth, they encourage construction. You already see it in the relative home values, between the West Coast and the Southeast. It's almost a 2x, 3x factor already. You add on top of that the fact that there's going to be more people or more supply hitting the market. Does it help the West Coast finally? Maybe. Was it going to help other places more? Probably. But yeah, I mean, we have again, morbid supply and demand change here coming in the next 10 years.
It's also, if you think about the people delaying, is that a lot of people have been delaying families, starting families over the last several generations. So I think also home ownership is also being delayed as well.
Yeah.
Is that perhaps you mentioned something about the average millennial in
Well,
terms of like their earning potential?
I had to. I mean, I basically had to redo this graph basically, but based on an economist that knows far more than I do. But what they call it is sort of peak earning years, and they're just. I mean, they must be just a absolute barrel of laughs at a party. But these people measure everything from when you spend the most on diapers versus potato chips versus whatever in your lifespan. And it used to be that you would spend. And this is the statistic for boomers. It was 43 when you spent the most on potato chips in your life, because you generally speaking had a kid at 30 and they were 13 and kids eat the most potato chips at 13. I'm again really dorky stuff, but regardless, it used to be that your peak earning years for a boomer, I think, were about 45. Now for Gen X, it's like more like 49, 50. I mean, that's just 4 or 5 year difference over the course of a 15-year different lifespan. And on top of that, I mean, housing costs are up considerably, insurance costs are up considerably between those two peak earning years. Well, if you flash forward another 15, 20, maybe it's 20 years now for millennials, because they're going to be further delayed. Maybe it's 55 for them when it's their peak earning years. And what are those dynamics telling us? So they're telling us that housing costs are going to go up even more over that time frame, at least based on current trends. So your share of what you spend money on, boomers to millennials, literally their parents to the kids, is pretty stark. I mean, it's anywhere from a 30 to 40% increase in housing cost, generation over generation. So that part's going to be interesting to see sort of play out. That's why, I mean, it feels like it's unsustainable, and it probably will correct, and it'll probably make that poll seem kind of silly in 10 or 15 years. But for right now, it seems like that's a rock solid prediction that, oh yeah, of course it's going to be next to impossible for millennials and Gen Z to ever own a home.
I read somewhere that, and it's been a while ago, and I kind of related back to it, that millennials cared less about ownership of things, wanted to rent more. They wanted less liability because they wanted to travel more. The remote work was great because they could go do and experience life in different ways, and that was important. So the idea of owning a home wasn't really important. And I don't know how true that is. It seems logical, but I haven't bought a home. I rent, but I don't want to buy a home personally because I have multiple businesses and I want to invest in businesses and other things. The house doesn't really matter to me, but the things I'm interested, I invest in those, which I don't know if that's a mindset, but home ownership isn't that important to me right now. It's more important because I have a son growing older that I'm eventually going to buy because it's for him. But for me personally, I don't know. I don't really care if I ever own a home. I'd rather keep, things moving in a business side of things. But that's, I don't know how. I'm technically a millennial, I guess, so maybe are on the cusp of it. So maybe that's part of it. Let's jump into the public policy side of things. How do things like zoning laws and entitlements impact the housing affordability and the supply?
Well, one of the biggest things we have in the state of Washington is the State Growth Management Act, which back when it was enacted, what it did, it told cities and counties, you have to define what's urban, what's rural. They want growth directed to urban areas. And what they want to do also is to create policies that promote growth in certain areas, higher densities near the urban centers, lower densities as you go towards the border, as you go towards the UGA. So what that did, it constricted land supply. It constricted the area that you could build on. Because before that, before the Growth Management Act, if you had 200 acres out in Graham, you could, as long as you had sewer service or you had ability to do septic, you can go put 200 lots out there. There's no problem. Well, now that area is in the Pierce County's rural zone, which is one home every 5 acres or one home every 10 acres. And as well in this region, I mean, we have a lot of wetlands. We have a lot of steep slopes. So we have a lot of areas that might be close in, but they are restricted to building. So that is made a severe restriction on where we can build, as compared to some other regions of, you go down to Texas, go down to Arizona, there's nothing in the way.
Big no shits down there.
You just keep going. You can just keep going. Here we have a lot of natural limits to where we can build. But at the same time, we actually have a lot of policies that do not allow us to direct growth where it could go.
So what goes up is land value.
What goes up land value?
Because now you have a constricted supply of that, and it's considerable.
It does. Like, for instance, there's some single-family lots in Bothell, which is north of Seattle. 30 lots. They're 40-foot wide by 90-foot deep, so they're really small lots, small flat lots. Those lots were sold for $750,000 each.
Just the lot, just the land.
And the builder who bought these lots built homes and sold them for about 1.2 to 1.4 million. So the land cost was half or even a little more than what the actual sales cost was. That's what we run into in this region. When I first started out, my boss always told me at my firm that you take the cost of the land, times it by 3 to 4, and that's what the sales price of the home should be. Well, now, as we've seen land prices skyrocket and permitting fees skyrocket and hookup fees skyrocket, in a lot of markets now we're getting it's half of the sales price. So what that has done is increase, of course, housing prices, but at the same time, it's also decreased what we see in a lot of homes.
Yeah.
So what gets cut is, full yard landscaping quite often, or extra trim, or these houses have gotten bigger, but at the same time, a lot of the finishes have been downgraded in certain markets.
They don't make them like they used to, Mike.
They don't.
What's HB 110?
HB 110 is a bill passed by the Washington State Legislature a couple of years ago that is uses the term missing middle housing. So HB 110, what it is dictated to multiple jurisdictions in the state of Washington is they have to increase the supply of what we call the missing middle housing. And what that means is that single family zoning needs to be modified to allow up to 4 residences, 6 residences if you're within a quarter mile or a half mile of transit. It has to allow potentially cottage homes, has to allow potentially ULS, which is a unit lot subdivision. So the whole goal of HB 110 is to increase densities in more urban and suburban areas. And this is only for cities over certain populations. The state has a tier 1 and tier 2 of cities that have to have a higher degree of density. And then there's a tier 3 of a lower population they don't have to do 4 to 6 plexes, they just have to do duplexes on all single family lots.
What's the definition of middle family housing? What is that?
So what the missing middle is trying to say is what's being built right now in a lot of places is either large single family homes or rentals, small rentals, like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom housing. That whole missing
but high
area,
density.
High density.
Excuse me, missing middle is what you said. Sorry. Okay.
So like I even remember when I was a kid going to model homes because I was a dork, I was 10 years old begging my dad to take me through these model homes being built. Is that there's a lot of subdivisions where they were building houses between 1,000 square feet and 1,500 square feet. When Chris and I were kids in this region, him and I both lived in small houses. I grew up in a 900 square foot house. Your house, I think, upstairs is 1,300 square feet. If we had a friend that lived in a 2,000 square foot house, it was like, whoa, that dude is, listen, his house is huge.
Yeah.
Now, in most subdivisions being built just because of land cost, the homes will start at 2,500 square feet or 3,000 square feet. And so that group of housing that is in that 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 square feet is not being built because the land values are too high to do that.
And they have to build the bigger houses to justify the land value.
Yeah, so the idea is if you reduce the size of the land required, that means you can't build a big house. You basically have to build a smaller house because your footprint is smaller.
A lot of the jurisdictions were trying to, and I think that was fair to say that this was a good goal, was to try and kind of replicate what you saw 100 years ago. Sort of the 2 flat, 3 flat design. You see row houses in San Francisco where they turn an old house into 3 units, or it was purpose built stuff. You see a ton of it in Chicago. They call it 3 flats, and basically it's 3 units in essentially the footprint of what you would have as a normal row house. And, to Mike's point, it was a great way for people to kind of graduate from the big apartment block to, eventually a single family home. And, we just haven't, a lot of zoning laws for a long time have not had that kind of bridge.
Well, zoning's the big part. So the state of Washington actually created requirements for these jurisdictions to follow as kind of like a guideline. And then each of these jurisdictions has to follow these guidelines to create their own response to the missing middle housing bill of how their zoning code is going to handle it. So some cities, like the city of Tacoma, have created the HIT, the home in Tacoma. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Home in Tacoma, where they've taken what the state has required and then put their own spin to it in terms of like, this is what's required within this area, of, this close to transit. You're required to have 1 parking stall per unit instead of 2, like previous zoning. And all this has to be done by the end of June this year. One thing that a lot of people are going to be really upset about HB 110 is the fact that the state is requiring a minimum of 35 foot of height for all missing middle projects.
Wait, I'm sorry, back up.
Yeah.
A minimum.
Minimum.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So a lot of jurisdictions, like you say, a lot of city of Tacoma is 25 feet
yeah.
currently.
Bye-bye views.
Bye-bye views.
So the idea behind it was trying to get a more affordable housing opportunity for the
Well,
middle
that same
class.
dynamic we talked about with land costs being so
Right.
high and so overrepresented.
Right.
The math would be, to Mike's point, North Bothell was a 700,000 square foot lot, or $700,000 lot.
Right.
That if you could turn it into 4 units, well, it's just 700,000 divided by 4.
Right. And it's
that
more
you solve
approachable.
your affordability issue just by dividing it up. So
But great, it's more affordable, but there's some consequences that are coming out of this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the consequences, because I think I've been hearing a lot about homes in Tacoma, and honestly, I'm more office retail, so I don't live in the residential world and design and construction. But the more we talk, the more I see the backside of this, the issues that we are going to run into in Tacoma, or potentially will. Let's talk about some of those right off the bat. What comes with density when you start shoving these units on one lot? What happens?
Well, one of the big things I think we're going to see a lot of repercussions of is parking. So a lot of people have vilified parking. A lot of planners in cities vilify it, where they say, parking dictates density. Look at these ugly parking lots. This could be housing. This could be, better used. Well, the dirty secret is we all have cars. I mean, most people do. Most people who own a home, the homeowner will have a car. Perhaps one of their children will have a car. Their spouse will have a car. And where do those cars go? So with home in Tacoma, the city has reduced the parking requirement from 2 stalls per unit for single family homes to 1 stall for a missing middle housing, and in some instances 0 if you have transit access. So what's going to happen, you're going to have these dense pockets of intense housing where potentially there's maybe 6 units of townhomes, but there's only 6 parking stalls.
Right.
In a lot of places in Tacoma, I mean, a lot of the curbs are marked as no parking, or there's driveway cuts all over. So where do those people go? They go into the surrounding neighborhoods to park. And I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be pretty upset and going, hey, this new townhome community next to me is taking all my parking.
yeah.
Right.
Because those people who buy these missing middle houses, they're not low income people. They're normal people like all of us. Like,
Yeah.
they may have a spouse with a car. Their 5-year-old's having a birthday party, and everybody's coming over, and all of a sudden there's 20 cars coming in that need to find a place to park.
And then there's some things too that, power in particular. I mean, we've asked the grid over the past 10 years to take on so much more than was designed to take originally.
Yeah.
There was a huge push 30 years ago. I mean, I remember my parents getting subsidized by Washington State Energy or Puget Sound Energy to put in natural gas. Well, now we've said, natural gas is now bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And we now took all that money that we spent on infrastructure to support all that changeover to now say, oh, no, we're going back to electric again, with systems that in many cases now it's, not only you're doing your lighting and everything else and your user convenience power, you're using, for HVAC, you're using it for electrical vehicles. I mean, it's that alone there's a huge disconnect between what the infrastructure will support currently versus what we're asking this to already supply, let alone densification beyond that.
Yeah.
So in some locations, it's going to be next to impossible unless there's huge investments on the electrical infrastructure side.
So when these policies are being developed, when they're talking through these concepts, who's in those conversations? Like, like, are there engineers in there? Are there people with real life experience that are thinking about these problems before?
Sometimes
There are. There's sometimes is, but I've been involved in some policy making in some places, and it's really interesting when we get together, we come up with some ideas that we present, and then when we see the final product, it's like that's
not
nothing
what we talked about.
Yeah. A lot of our policy is being written by people that don't have experience in the field, that don't understand the electrical needs, don't understand the sewer needs, don't understand the issues that you have when all of a sudden you have a region that has a 25-foot height restriction for view protection, and then all of a sudden you're going to add 10 feet to it.
In my mind, it's sort of a function of things getting so complicated and in many cases sort of overburdened as far as rules are concerned, to the point where you just, in many cases, if you stand back and look at it, you're like, well, none of this makes sense because no one actually has the power to be able to take all of it in totality and say, is this really actually accomplishing any of the things that the separate groups have said they're trying to accomplish? And there's certainly not anybody looking back on it and saying, okay, weighting against it, is this the right priority? Should this be given the full weight of our understanding and be 100% prioritized versus this one thing over here should be 20% prioritized? No one's doing that. It's just 100%, or whoever has the most political sway.
I mean, Tacoma is in a position right now that it has never been a popular city, other than the people that are from here. Very proud of it.
Yep.
But as we do more and more, I mean, through Tacoma Rising, all the things that we're working on, Tacoma is turning, it's changing, and it would be very good to have a unified approach to what that change looks like. And if we have everything going off in different directions and no one's really understanding what decisions we make today will impact in 10 years, then it could just be a miss. But I think that's worth all these things happening right now. Now's the time to start getting the people, the experts in the room or rooms, and start having these conversations about this, because the more I hear about home in Tacoma, I think the concept is great, but it would be nice that it had very clear direction from people that are involved in it. And I don't know that it has, or maybe it has, but anyway, but to your point, I just feel like there's an opportunity to really drive the bus here for Tacoma. And hopefully, as we've got things shifting in that direction, we're thinking through that.
Yeah,
definitely.
All right, guys. Well, thank
Thanks.
you. Let's go get some dinner.
Yeah,
What do you guys think? All right.